We're in.
Okay, Tov, today's daf is daf Vav. And we have a statement of Rav Ashi. The Gemara is focused on the issue of Lishma, and specifically on the issue of how the Shliach is going to be able to testify that the Sofer wrote the get Lishma. And Rav Ashi says, Afilu kan kol Musa v'kan megilsa. The shliach doesn't have to be there from the beginning of the writing of the get until its end, and hear that the sofer from the beginning to the end wrote Lishma. In fact, he doesn't even have to be in the same room as the shliach. He could be at a distance, as long as he's able to hear the kol tikun hakulmus, the kol tikun haklaf. And he heard that the sofer declared when he was masaking the klaf and he prepared the klaf, or the kulmus, the quill, sha'osekain kidei lichtov get lishma. He's doing it for the sake of writing a get lishma. Now the Rosh points out that in addition to hearing the sofer declare that he's making these preparations lishma, he has to recognize the klaf b'tvias ayin. Because if he doesn't recognize the klaf, then how does he know that the klaf that he received from the Baal is indeed that same klaf that the shliach, that the sofer wrote lishma? But if he recognizes the klaf and he saw the klaf being given over to the sofer, he heard the sofer declare that he's writing it lishma, and he received that same identical klaf back in return from the sofer. And then he delivered the get to the Isha, then he can testify b'fanei nechtam. He can testify on Lishma. Tanya Kavasi de Rav Ashi, the Gemara quotes a brayso to support Rav Ashi. Maybe get mibdinas hayam afilu hu bebayis vasofer ba'aliyah, hu ba'aliyah vasofer bebayis. So clearly, in this context of the brayso, the shliach is not in the same room as the sofer. The shliach doesn't even see the sofer. The shliach is up in the attic, whereas the sofer is down on the bottom level, or vice versa. Vafilu nichnas v'yotze kol yom kulei kosher. We'll see later on the Gemara is going to interpret that as referring to the sofer who goes in and out the whole day. In all these cases, the Bryce establishes that the shliach could testify on b'fanei nechtav, namely that the get was written lishma. So the Gemara asks the obvious question on the Bryce: Who bebayis v'sofer ba'aliyah lo kachazile? If the sofer is up in the attic and the shliach is down on the bottom level, they don't even see each other. How can he testify that the ksiva was done lishma? He doesn't even see the ksiva at all. Elallah, but rather we have to fall back on Rav Ashi and support Rav Ashi. Kigon deshama kol kumusa v'kan megilsa. So the very fact that he knows that the sofer made this declaration when he prepared the klaf and the kulmus that he's writing this get lishma, he can testify that the get was in fact written lishma. Omar Mar, afilu nichnas v'yotze kol yom kulo kosher man. Who is this person about whom the end of the brayso formulates the rule that even if he's going in and out, who's going in and out? Ilem shliach. If the shliach is going in and out, then the brayso is not adding a thing, because the brayso says that even if he doesn't even see the sofer, he's in a different part of the house. Is hashtu b'bayis sofer b'lilo chazile armin kosher nichnas v'yotze boy? Do you have to tell me that the shliach, if he goes in and out to the sofer and he sees the sofer writing the get, that he can testify b'fanei nechtav? That's obvious. Ella, but rather by proselytization sofer, the Bryce has in mind that it's the sofer who comes in and out. He's not writing the get continuously. At certain points, he goes out to the shuk, and then he returns to complete the writing of the get. So Gemara says pshita. Why should I think mishum the nichnas v'yotze nifsaline? Should that create some sort of psul on the get just because he took a hefsek? What is it like brachos or kriyat shema shmona esrei, where the hefsek is mevatel the mitzvah? He went out to the shuk, and in the shuk, people talk and the things going on. There's a lot of hustle and bustle. And perhaps perhaps the sofer met someone who has the same name as the person for whom the get was originally written. And now that person says to the sofer, he's the same Reuven ben Shimon, and he says to the sofer, I'd like to authorize you to write a get on my behalf. So now the sofer continues writing the get, but in this case, he has in mind the second Reuven ben Shimon, not the first. Kamash Malan, that's what the Bryce wants to add here, that we're not choshesh for such a possibility, even though it's logical, but it's not statistically probable. Okay, now we begin the main sugya for today, and that is the status of Bavel with regard to B'fanei Nechtam. We know that Eretz Yisrael, there is a Bekiyas B'Lishma, and in Medinas Hayam, as Rabbah points out, there's no Bekiyas in Lishma. What about Bavel? Bavel had great yeshivos. There was a great yeshiva, for example, in Surah, another great yeshiva in Pumpadisa. There was a whole map of yeshivos in Bavel, and no doubt they knew the laws of Lishma. Itmar Bavel Rav Omar Ke'eretz Yisrael Gittin. Rav says that the status of Bavel, as far as Gittin is concerned, is that of Eretz Yisrael. So if a person brings a get from Bavel, then he doesn't have to say B'fanei Nechtam. Now here we have to point out that Tosfos, Dibra Masel Bavel, emphasized that this sugi that we're learning here, and the Machlok Shin Rav, we didn't even see Shmuel, the dissenting view, is all about a case of a shliach who brings a get from one Medina in Bavel to another Medina in Bavel. Because if it's within the same Medina in Bavel, and we know that, let's say there was a Bekiyas in Lishma, then for sure there's no need, even according to Shmuel, for the shliach to say B'fanei Nechtam, because certainly within the same Medina in Bavel, there are Shayaras Mitzuyos, and there's no need to be Mekayim the get. So the machlokas now, says Tosfos, is with regard to a case where he goes from one Medina to another Medina. And therefore, there's a problem of Ein Shayos Mitzuyos from one Medina in Bavel to the other. And Shmuel Omar, Kichutzaretz, that the status of Bavel is equal to that of Chutzaretz. So if you went from one Medina to another Medina in Bavel, you need B'fanei Nechtam. Now, the simple pshat in the machlokas between Rav and Shmuel would be the old machlokas Shin Rabbah and Rabbah. Meaning, if we go with Rabbah and the chashash here, that the requirement for B'fanei Nechtam is because of Lishma, then in Bavel, which was the Torah center, the spiritual center in its time, they were certainly became B'Lishma. Shmuel, on the other hand, is worried about Kiyum Ashtar, and since it's from one Medina to another Medina in Bavel, we need Kiyum Ashtar. But of course, that's not going to hold water because we've already established back on Daf Daled that Rabbah accepts Rabbah. And Rabbah is also worried about Shayaras Mitzuyos. Now, with regard to a person who brings a shliach, who brings a get from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, that's not the subject of this machlokas, Tosfos points out, between Rav and Shmuel. That's going to be a machlokas later on Daf Vav and Beis between Rav Yosar and Rav Yosef. Later, Bahakam Mifli, should we assume that the machlokas between Rav and Shmuel is identical with the machlokas Rabbah and Rava? Demar Sabar Rav is of the opinion of Vishem Bekin Lishma Hanik Miri. The Bnei Bavel are Bekim and Lishma, and therefore you don't need B'fanei Nechtam. Demar Sabar Shmuel's of the opinion of Vishem Eidem Mitzuyim L'Kaimo. And when you're going from one Medina to another in Bavel, Hani Nami Lo Shkich, it's very difficult to find witnesses who can testify and authenticate the signatures on the get. Therefore, we require that the shliach be makayim the get. But if it's his brother, Gemara says you can't make that assumption because Harava Islay the Rava also agrees that you need kiyum haget because ain't shayos mitzuyos, and therefore in Medina Achas beBavel that's fine. There's no problem with lishma and there's no problem with shayos mitzuyos. But from one Medina to another, in Bavel we should certainly require Fadei Nechtam, and Rav now makes no sense. El Dukulial Vidin Lekaimo. Everybody agrees that you need to be Makayim the get. Rav so came into Ikom Sivta, Mishkat Shchichi. There are Talmidim that go from one yeshiva to another. So, for example, you have Surah in one Medina of Bavel, that's where Rav lived, and then you have another major Torah center in Narda, the place where Shmuel lived. And it's shchiach, it's very common for Talmidim to go from one yeshiva to the other. And therefore, Mishkat Shchichi, when we need to find witnesses who can recognize the signatures on the get, if the Baal's Ma'ar on the get, then it'll be a cinch to find such witnesses next time the yeshiva guys go from Surah to Narda, or vice versa. But now, it comes out that Rav is relying on the movement of yeshiva students, that yeshiva students are coming back and forth, they'll recognize signatures. Now, is it really true, and that's what Shmuel's going to question now, that yeshiva students who are completely outside of the purview of the business world, they don't see signatures on documents, they're going to recognize the two signatures on the document? Shmuel Sober Mesifta Girsayot Torah. In the yeshivas, they're busy learning Torah. And therefore, they don't recognize, they cannot identify the signatures of those who might have signed on this get. And once again, therefore, it's going to be very difficult to find a likiyum, and on the side that maybe perhaps the Baal will come be ma'ar and say that this is mezuyaf, we need to be makayim the get, and therefore the shliach has to say fani nechta. Now, there's a note here that says, in the name of the Bali Tosfos, that even Shmuel, who holds that the Bnei Yeshivas are preoccupied with their Torah studies, nevertheless, within the same Medina, right? We said that Surah and Nardo were in two different Medinos in Bavel, but had they been in the same Medina, Shmuel would concede that you don't require Fani Nechta. And that means that the reason of Tirdas Halimud, that could explain why Bavel is not the same as Eretz Yisrael. But certainly within the same Medina, there are many people other than Yeshiva Bachrim who are in the business world, who are not Torah B'limudam, and they will be available to be Makayim the get. Itmar Nami, and now the Gemara is going to bring a statement of Rabbi Abba to prove that the reason why Rav does not require Fani Nechtam in Bavel is because of the yeshivos kvuos b'medinos halalu. So the Bachrim in the yeshiva Mitzuyim, they're available, going back and forth from Surah to Nardot, from one Medina to the other to be kind to get. Because it Marnami Amar Rab Abba Amar Rab Huna Sinu Atzmeinu beBavel ke'Eretz Yisrael Gittin. That our minhag is to consider Bavel as far as Gittin to be like Eretz Yisrael. We don't need B'fani Nechtam. And Mechiasa Rab beBavel. However, Rabbi Abba makes a historical restriction here. It's not always true that Bavel has the status of Eretz Yisrael and Gittin. It's only after Rav came to Bavel and he set up the yeshiva in Surah, and Shmuel came to Narda and set up the yeshiva in Narda. And then Talmidim were going back and forth from one yeshiva to the other. And therefore, it's Shayaris Mitzuyos, it's Shliach to find Eidikim, and there's no need for the Shliach to be made that Fani Nechtam. But before Rav got there, then for sure we would require that the Shliach declare b'fanei nechtam, because even though they were bekim b'lishma, but nevertheless, when Nebuchadnezzar sent the Jewish people into Golus, into Bavel with Yechonia Melch Yehuda, they were accompanied by what's called Hacheresh VaMizkar. And those two words, the Gemara later on Peches is going to explain that Cheresh and Mizkar mean Talmidei Chacham. Why Cheresh and Mizkar? So let's talk about Cheresh. Cheresh means that they were open to hear Divrei Halacha, and they would sort of be like mute people in order to listen to the Torah without, so to speak, arguing against the Torah. So that's called Sogrim Es Piem, and therefore that's called Cheresh U'Mazkir. So these were the Talmidei Chachamim who were sent into Golus by Nebuchadnezzar and set into Bavel. However, even though it's true that these Talmidei Chacham continued throughout the history of Bavel, but nevertheless, and for sure they were Bekim and Lishma, but nevertheless, we still require B'fanei Nechtav because they're on Shayoros Mitzuyos. So we see clearly from Rabbi Abba that the Machlok between Rav and Shmuel is whether or not in Bavel there's Shayoros Mitzuyos. And that's why he makes the distinction between the period of time before Rav established the yeshiva and Shmuel his yeshiva and the period afterwards. Masav Rabbi Yirmiyah asked a kasha from our Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda set up the Gvulas of Eretz Yisrael in Gittin and our Mishnah, the Omer, and he says the following, right? There's the east, and then there's the south, and then there's the north. And he says the following, that Mirekem LeMizrach, as far as the eastern part, that's east of the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael, then Rekem and eastward has the status of Medina Sayyam. And therefore, the Mevi get, the Shliach who brings the get from Rekem to Eretz Yisrael is going to have to recite the B'fanei Nechtam. Rekem itself is Kemizrach. In other words, Rekem has the din of Chutzlars. On the south side of Eretz Yisrael, Ashkelon is beyond the border of Eretz Yisrael. The Ashkelon Kidorom, it has the status of Chutzlars. In the north, may Akko Itzafon, the Akko Kitzafon. So Akko is on the other side of the northern border of Eretz Yisrael, has the status of Chutzlars, and we require B'fanei Nechtam. But so for the Gemara says, well, Bavel's a tzafon of Eretz Yisrael kaima. Bavel is on the northern part of Eretz Yisrael. Dichsiv, as the pasuk says in Yirmiyah, Vayomer Hashem Elai mitzafon tipatach hara. In other words, when the enemies of Israel are going to come from Bavel, they'll come from the north. Utanan. And in the Mishnah itself, in the next part of the Mishnah, it says, Rabbi Meir Omer, Akko Eretz Yisrael Gittin. Akko has the same status as Eretz Yisrael Gittin. You don't require B'fanei Nechtam. The Afilu Rabbi Meir, who disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda as far as Akko, because Rabbi Yehuda's sheet is that Akko is already in Chutz La'aretz, the Akko Kitzafon, and Rabbi Meir disagrees as far as Akko. Lo Ka'amar, when did Rabbi Meir waive the requirement of B'fanei Nechtam, and a shliach that brings a get from Akko? It'll be Akko de Mekarav, but that's because Akko is very close to Eretz Yisrael, and therefore it has the status of Eretz Yisrael as far as Gittin is concerned. Well, Bavel, the Merakaka, but Bavel, which is much further, then even Rabbi Meir would agree low that it doesn't have the status of Eretz Yisrael, but rather it has the status of Chutzlars, and that's a difficulty according to Rav, because Rav says that Bavel has the status of Eretz Yisrael Gittin, and the Gemara says who Mosif Lo, who Mefarik Lo. Rabbi Yirmiyah, who asked this kasha, also answered the kasha. L'barami Bavel, and the Mishnah speaks about those places that are tzafona of Eretz Yisrael. It did not include Bavel in that description, because in Bavel, because of the yeshivos in Bavel and the transport of Talmidim from one yeshiva to another in Bavel, Bavel is given the status of Eretz Yisrael. Gemara asks at Heichon hi Bavel. Where is the Gvul of Bavel? In other words, we're now in the north of Eretz Yisrael. We're in Bavel, and now Rav is of the opinion that Bavel has the status of Eretz Yisrael in Gittin. How far north can we go? Omar Papa, Kimachlokas liyuchsin, Kach machlokas ligittin. In the Masechet Kiddushin Adaf Ayin Aleph, with regard to the issue of Babylonian Jews, whether or not we have to check out the yichus, because as a general rule, the mishpachos in Bavel were considered miyuchasos, and then the issue is, and therefore we don't have to be bodek to find out if there are any admixture of mamzerim, nesinim, etc., that would passel their yichus. We can marry their girls without checking them out, but where is the gvul of Bavel? And Rav Papa says, well, we're going to have machlokas Shin Rav and Shmuel. Where is the gvul of Bavel? And beyond that gvul, you have to check out the yichus. And beyond that gvul, they have a status of chutz la'aretz as far as hamevi get, and the shliach would be required to say fani nechta. So that same identical machlokas as to where the gvul, the boundaries of Bavel, are with regard to yuchsin, is the identical machlokas will have the same repercussions as a machlokas with regard to Gittin. Rabbi Yosef Omer, no, machlokas liyuchsin aval Gittin, even though as far as yuchsin, Rav and Shmuel and Masechet Kiddushin are going to debate the issue of where is the gvul for yuchsin, beyond which we will have to be bodek for tarovas psulim. But as far as Gittin is no machlokas, libya kol an arba tinyana de gishra, and that's called, what is the din of Bavel Keretz Yisrael? That's up until this arava, which is close to the gesher. Anything beyond that is chutz la'aretz. And the Gemara now tells the following story. Rav Chizda, when he had to determine whether or not the shliach would be required to recite Fani Nechtam, he made the following statement. Max Tisofdan, which is beyond Bavel, on the other side of the Euphrates of the Chidekel, Lebe'ar Deshir, to a place in Bavel that's on the other side of the great river. That's like the Medina, and we require Fani Nechta. However, the Be'ar Deshir le'astikofan, in the opposite direction, lo matzah. Rav Chiz did not require Fani Nechta. So what does that mean? So the Gemara initially understood Leva Lefisha Ein Kasava Lefisha Ein Bekin Lishma, that Rav Chizda accepted the original understanding of Rabbah, meaning that the entire issue of Fani Nechta exhausts itself in the Chash of Lishma, Mahani Gemiri. So the members of the city of Ardashir, they were Bekiyim, and therefore if you bring a get from there, there's no need for Fani Nechta. However, the members of the city of Artiskvan, they were not Bekiyim, and therefore if you bring a get from Artiskvan, you have to recite the Fani Nechta. The Tizbra, but wait a minute. Rabba Islay de Rava. We know that Rabba also accepts the opinion of Rava that there's a chashash and a requirement of kiyum get, and therefore, in the cases of Ardashir and Akitisa, they're in two different medinos in Bavel. Then for sure we'd have to recite the Fani Nechtam, no matter in which direction we go. The difference in direction of Rav Chizda can only make sense if you exhaust yourself with the chash of Lishma. And that depends where your part of the departure is, and if there's Bekiyas B'Lishma in that makom. But now that we're holding that everybody, even Rabbah, agrees that we have to worry about Kiyum Ashtar, then what difference to make which point you departed from? It's Ein Shayaros Mitzuyos. Ella, the Gemara says, no. Tekuli Alma Bin L'Kaima. Everybody agrees that you need Fani Nechtam in order to be L'Kaim the get and authenticated signatures. Bahani, but the members of Ardashir, Keva di Azi L'Shuka L'Hasam, they would travel to the big marketplaces that were located in Aktisfan. And Hanoch and the people who lived in Aktisfan, Yadei B'Chasimas Yodi Dahane. In other words, when the Bnei Ardashir came to Aktisfon, in order to do their business, they had to sign documents and so forth. So the local merchants in Aktisfon recognized their signatures. And since the Bnei Ardashir, when they came to the Shuk, they signed on various documents, maybe sales of bill, or maybe they borrowed money and they signed on Shtari Alva. All these shtaros were being held by the Anshe Aktisfon. And therefore, they would recognize the signatures and they can testify on the signatures. But the other way around, the Bnei Ardashir, they didn't recognize the signatures of the Anshe Aktisfon because it was the Ardashir people who went to Aktisfon for the Shuk and not the other way around. And my timer, Bishukayu Tride. The Bnei Ardashir, when they come to the Shuk, they're busy with sales and making deals. They're not going to pay attention to any chasimos of the Bnei Aktisfon. Therefore, if a get comes from Ardashir to Aktisfon, the Bnei Aktisfon will in a chak, will be able to be Mekayim the Shtaros. They recognize and they identify the chasimos of the Bnei Ardashir. But in the other way around, if somebody brings a get from Aktisfon, he's going to have to testify that B'nai Nechta because the Bnei Ardashir did not recognize the chasimos of the Bnei Aktisfon. So if the get originated in Aktisfon, then we won't have in Ardashir Edim to be Mekayim the get, and therefore we need the Shliach to Mekayim the get. Rabba Baravua Matzrich Me Arso Li Arso. And now we're talking about the city of Mechoza in Bavel. And we're going to have three different rulings of three different Amoraim, all of whom lived in Mechoza, as far as whether the Shliach has to recite Fanei Nechta or Fanei Nechta. So let's go through all three Amoraim. The first one is Rabba Baravua. And he only went so far. He said that you need b'fanei nechta me arsa li arsa. What's an arsa? An arsa is a row of houses, shuras habatim, that's on the border of Rishus HaRabim. And on the other side of the road, there's another arsa, another shuras habatim. And if you cross over from one side to the other, then Rabbah requires b'fanei nechta. However, if let's say within each neighborhood you would bring a get from one part of the neighborhood to the other, then Rabbah would waive the requirement of b'fanei nechta. Rav Sheshes, now we're up to the second Amora. He was more machmir umatzuk mishkuna l'shkuna. He requires that even if you're bringing the get from one group of houses to another group of houses, you require Fanei Nechta, even if you're not crossing over the road from Rishus HaRabim to the other side of Rishus HaRabim. And then Rav is the most machmir of all of them. He's the third Amora in Mechozo, Matzach bi Osa Shkuna. We require Fanei Nechtam even within the same group of houses, from one house to the next. So the Gemara asks for Ramu Diyomel Fishein Edom Mitzuyim L'Kaimo. Certainly within the same shkuna, you have plenty of Edom going back and forth. The Gemara answers that the Bnei Mechuzah were never home. Shiny Bnei Mechuzah did neither. They were always on the run, always on a business trip. And therefore they don't recognize the signatures of their own neighbors. Rav Chanin Mishtoi, Rav Chanin used to tell the following story. Rav Kahana Isi Gita, Rav Kahana brought a get, V'lo Yadana, and I don't know, Imisur L'nardoi Minadol Surah. I'm not sure in which direction Rav Kahana brought the get. Also L'kami de Rav, and Rav Kahana came in front of Rav, and he wanted to know whether or not he has to recite Fanei Nechta. Amalei, Rav Kahana says to Rav Tzrichna, L'meim Fanei Nechta, O Lo Tzrichna. Amalei Lo Tzrichas. According to the strict letter of the law, you're not required to testify funny nechtam, because this is Rav consistent with his own shita that Bavel has the same status as Eretz Yisrael as far as Gittin. Does that mean that Rav would tell Rav Kahana, don't even bother with funny nechtam? So that we're going to see here on Daf Vav Amud Beis.